And we're with John Lott. We're going to take your phone calls as well. John, do you travel much, speaking engagements?
Yeah, I probably give about, 40, 50 talks a year.
That's a lot.
Well,
that is.
I appreciate the chance to be able to do it.
Generally, what's the response? People in the crowd, what do they say?
Well, it depends on the audience. I often end up talking about guns. And
to pro-gun folks primarily?
Well, it's about half and half. I mean, a lot of talks I go and give are to universities. And I think the amazing thing is just how easy it is, though, to get to people to think twice about some of these gun issues, that once you can go and get information to them, it's just that they never really had the idea expressed to them in certain ways. Take something that seems controversial, like these gun-free zones, that people think, well, it's just so obvious. We should go and ban guns from these areas, and that will make it safer. But the problem is, who's most likely to obey these rules? And if it's the law-abiding good citizens who respect these rules and don't take their guns in there and not the criminals, you can accomplish the opposite of what you'd like. So you ask people questions. Let's say you were really seriously being stalked or threatened, you or your family. Would you feel safer putting a sign up in front of your home that said your home is a gun-free zone?
No, not at all.
No, and the reason is obvious, and that is what you're telling the criminal is he has less to worry about. It goes exactly back to what we were talking about last
It's like saying, come on in.
Right. And so rather than repelling people, it actually serves as a magnet to have crimes occur there because these criminals know that they have less to worry about. But, the natural reaction, first of all, is, well, let's just ban it, and that will make us safer. And, we see D.C. and Chicago have been massive gun-free zones where they've just tried to make the area safer by banning guns. But we see, as we also mentioned, that those are places where murder rates have gone up, that time after time when bans have occurred, murder rates have gone up. And it's just people, I can't tell you the number of times I go and talk to people and they just say they've never heard of defensive gun uses. They hear about the bad things that happen, and that has an impact on people. I think facts matter a lot to people in the gun debate, but the problem is not the amount of information that they've received, because they probably think they know more about guns than almost anything else because they hear about guns all the time in the news. And the news gives them an idea of what the costs and benefits of owning guns are. And when you go and you get them to question about the information that they get from the media, like I'll just give you a simple example.
Sure.
If you look at the few defensive gun use cases that are covered in the media, 80% of the time that defensive gun use is mentioned within local media, it involves a case where the killer's killed. In almost all the rest, in about 18% of the rest of the cases, the attacker has been seriously wounded. Now, you would think that may tell you something about reality, but it really doesn't, because when people use guns defensively, fewer than 1 out of every 1,000 times that people use guns defensively is the attacker killed. The 90-some% of the time simply brandishing the gun is able to get the criminal to run away. But those aren't newsworthy cases. What makes it more newsworthy is when somebody gets killed. And so, just listening to the news to get an idea of even what happens in terms of defensive gun uses would make you think that most of the time when people use guns defensively, the attacker gets killed. And that couldn't be further from the truth. But, it's just a simple example of how what fits in terms of newsworthiness can kind of skew, be so different from what actually happens in reality. And I think the news media does a really poor job. When I was doing the Bias Against Guns, I'd come across 10 stories where children 8, 9, 10 years of age in 1 year, 2001, had used guns in heroic ways to save family members' lives. Mm-hmm. And I noticed, I want to figure this out after the book, though, that the same reporters had written other crime stories. Like there was one case in South Bend, Indiana, where the crime reporter there had written a story about a taxi cab driver who had been killed in an armed robbery, and he'd gotten picked up and carried in 28 different newspapers around the country. Whereas this heroic case I can tell you about where this 10-year-old boy saved his grandmother had a 250-word story in the back of the South Bend, Indiana newspaper. And so I called up the reporter and I said, why is it that you think that this common case, because in many years being a cab driver is the most dangerous occupation in the United States, mainly from crime, got picked up in so many newspapers because, it should be, man bites dog is much more of a news story than dog bites man. And you would think that should be the rare, shouldn't be picked up. And yet her response was the same response I got from other reporters, and that is that they are worried about accidental gun deaths involving kids. And they think it's much more frequent than it actually is. But the thing is, they think if they have a positive story about a child saving somebody else's life, that might encourage people to let children have access to guns, and then therefore they would be responsible for accidental gun deaths. So when they come across stories like that, well-meaning, though wrong, they would go and not give very much coverage to it. And in one case I was talking about with this 10-year-old boy, his mom was a drug addict, had dated a gang leader, and told the gang leader that the grandmother, who was taking care of the boy because the mother had completely left the scene by this time, kept money and jewelry at the home. And so the gang leader had gone in there, stabbed the grandmother in the stomach, had a knife to her throat, and was demanding that she tell him where the money and jewelry was. She was holding out as long as she could because she was convinced as soon as she told him he was going to kill her and then kill her grandson. Well, the boy's father, who had died of cancer a year earlier, before he had died, had taken the boy shooting and showed him how to use a gun. And the boy had gone up, gotten the grandmother's gun, come down, and fatally shot this gang leader in the chest. The grandmother and the police were both completely convinced that this boy had saved both of their lives. And you think a heroic story like that would be newsworthy.
No, it doesn't get much play. Let's take some calls here, John. East of the Rockies, Joel in Memphis, Tennessee, you're up with us. Hi, Joel.
Hey, George. How you doing?
Great. Go ahead.
Dr. Watt, I enjoy this topic very much. I drive a truck for a living, but I also teach handgun safety course. Our local newspaper recently, we've got legislation going through right now, but our local newspaper ran the names of every person in the state of Tennessee that has a handgun permit.
Right.
And right now it's a liberal newspaper, and we're fighting them tooth and nail, trying to get legislation passed that to keep that information private.
Right. Is this the Memphis paper?
Yes, it is.
Right. The people who get harmed by that the most are the non-gun owners. Because the criminals know then who can't protect themselves.
That's a good point.
Let's say you had a stalker out there, and he could see the list, and he could see that the person that he was stalking didn't have a permit to carry a concealed handgun. Would that make him more or less likely to want to stalk that person and maybe harm them?
And it's up on the internet where anybody can see it and anybody can find that information, and it puts people at risk.
Right.
I carry a handgun. Tennessee is not a concealed state.
It is.
And be legal, but you could also carry it on your hip.
Right.
I don't let anybody know that I have a handgun because, the first person that is...
No, I understand what you're saying. And, the thing about concealed carry is that people who would never think of owning a gun or let alone carrying it, benefit from the fact some others do, because the criminals don't know until they attack you whether or not you're that person who's able to defend yourself or not. And so that creates a benefit for everybody, the fact that some people are willing to do it. It's costly to carry a gun. You got to go and buy it. You got to go through the training. You got to pay the fees.
Opens yourself up to civil liabilities if you do the wrong thing.
Right. And these good citizens out there are bearing a cost that protects other people. I mean, they should be rewarded for doing this. But I assume the newspaper is doing it because it thinks that